Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna keep watching Caesar in Gaul, right? From Kings and Generals. We're going on a break from the Second Punic War because we have done reactions to both parts of that series. And the last time we saw Caesar, he conquered almost all of Gaul, or all of Gaul and nowadays Belgium, the Belgae tribes, I think. And now I think he's going to Britain, right? Original videos down below. Let's go.
According to Caesar, the Britons had provided some of the Gallic tribes with the resources needed to make war.
Makes
While
sense.
this was a weak casus belli, Caesar was, by now, effectively doing what he wanted with little oversight. He
Right.
began gathering intel from the Gallic merchants and sent a small reconnaissance force to the island, whilst he mustered the ships he used against the Veneti and prepared to cross with the 7th and 10th Legion.
I mean, that's a pretty good standard move, right? You have some intel, not spies, but you have intel from merchants, right? Who are probably trading with the Britons. You use the ships that you use to win against the tribes at Brittany, right? Seems pretty good.
He set sail from modern Calais and safely made it across with most of his army, but his cavalry had been delayed by bad weather.
Uh-oh.
The Romans saw the Britons had amassed along the White Cliffs of Dover in huge
Look at
numbers, with infantry, cavalry and chariots, and with every warrior painted in fierce blue war paint.
I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, seeing that you're on the Roman ships and seeing them in blue paint, I mean, that's... wow. But also, it's cool that the Britons have chariots. I mean, that came from, I think, like the steppes, right? Nowadays, Russia almost, right? That's pretty cool that it went all the way to Britain where they use chariots, which makes sense because I don't think they use chariots in battle, the Romans. They use it more for parades and all that, right? And maybe transportation for important people. Wow.
Caesar moved further down the coast in order to find a better place to land, but was shadowed by the Britons' cavalry and chariots, who were easily able to keep pace with the fleet.
Yeah, difficult.
When the Romans finally found a suitable beach, Caesar arranged his transport vessels into a long line with his warships on his flanks and ordered his men to disembark.
I mean, this is very difficult. How are you going to land when they have chariots and cavalry almost right at a beach? They're just waiting for you to go a little bit on the beach and then they just charge you, right? You might need like projectiles or something to shoot them, right? But also, this is one of the times where the island of Britain, Great Britain, right, has been invaded, right? I mean, another time, I think the Romans do it again, but another time they're invaded, obviously, are from the Saxons, right? And the Angles. But also, I think the final time they're invaded twice, though, is in 1066, right? From the Vikings up by York or Yorktown. Yorktown? No, that's in US. No, York, right? Jorvik from the Vikings. And then, obviously, from William the Conqueror down in south, right? Wow.
As the transport vessels had deep keels, however, they were still some way from the shore, and the legions were forced to wade in waist-deep in water to try and reach the beach.
They have
Britons
armor.
saw their opportunity and attacked, firing missiles into the ranks of the legionnaires as they struggled through the water, weighed down by their armor.
I mean, that looks like a massacre.
Cavalry charged in and out of the Romans, the height advantage of being on horseback, allowing them to fight much more effectively than the Romans stuck in the water.
Right.
The legionaries were taking significant casualties, and seeing this, Caesar moved his shallower-keeled warships up the flanks so that his missile troops and ballistae could fire into the Britons' sides.
Right, that was yeah, I thought that, right? Okay, makes sense.
Still, the legions were wavering, with some men not even being willing to get off their transports.
Uh-oh.
It was not until an eagle-bearer of the 10th Legion leapt into
Look
the
at
water
that.
and waded towards the Britons that the legions rallied and rejoined
Yep.
the battle in earnest. The fighting was fierce and contested, with the Romans gathering to their nearest standards to try and maintain some form of cohesion, while Caesar used rowing boats to ferry men from the transports to areas where the Roman front line looked to be in danger.
I mean, that's why you have standards, right?
Finally, the Romans were able to push through the shallows onto the beach, where their organization and heavy armor could come into play, at which point the Britons broke off and retreated. Caesar, without any cavalry, had no choice but to let them escape.
Right.
We don't know the numbers of dead on either side, but being a contested landing, it's likely that the Roman losses were greater.
That makes sense. Wonder why the Britons just don't use almost all their troops to just attack the Romans. I guess they wanted them first to be weakened by cavalry and chariots and missiles, and then the infantry, and they have archers or something like that to kill the weakened. Okay.
Following the battle, the Romans established a camp on the beach, and the Britons sent delegates to sue for peace, probably to assess the Romans' purpose in the area.
Sure.
They were on home ground and could afford to wait to see what Caesar's next move would be, whereas Caesar, with no supply line, would be pressured to make the first move. Caesar accepted the peace, and the Britons sent a small number of hostages, promising more later.
Okay.
The cavalry that had been waylaid did try and cross once again to meet Caesar, but were caught in a storm and forced to turn back.
Wow.
This same storm damaged the ships that Caesar had anchored off the beach, demoralizing the Romans, who could no longer escape the island.
I mean, that's like a tactic that the Gauls or the German tribes use, right? Destroying their home so they have nothing to turn back to, so they have to push forward into Gaul and Roman territory, right? This could make or break Caesar's army, right?
Salvaging what materials he could from the most damaged ships, Caesar began repairs. He sent one legion at a time to forage for food, whilst the others defended the camp on the beach. However, whilst one of the legions was out foraging, the camp watch reported seeing dust on the horizon moving their way. This, combined with the lack of the promised extra hostages, was enough to alert Caesar to what was happening. He gathered 2 cohorts and marched quickly to the legion's location.
Is this gonna be a massacre?
Whilst foraging, the legion had been ambushed. Scattered and focused on collecting food, the Britons had been able to kill a substantial number of them in the initial attack.
Wow.
The legion had managed to regain some level of discipline, snatching up their weapons, but they were surrounded by the British cavalry and chariots. British charioteers were trained to throw missiles from their chariots and then dismount to fight on foot, before hopping back on the chariot when the fighting got too hard in order to regroup. This gave them the staying power of infantry and mobility of cavalry, a tactic Caesar admired, but was now taking a heavy toll on the surrounded legion.
I mean, they're surrounded.
Upon Caesar's arrival with his cohorts in formation, the cavalry and chariots retreated. The Britons had no desire to fight heavy infantry in formation in a pitched battle without their own infantry support.
That makes sense.
Allowed the legion to withdraw to camp with Caesar.
Wow.
However,
I mean, they were only foraging and then they got attacked and almost obliterated. Wow.
Bolstered by this success, the Britons amassed their full force of infantry, cavalry and chariots and marched on the camp. Caesar drew out his legions to meet them. So far, he had been fighting in difficult circumstances, in water, in ambushes, against a highly mobile enemy. But this was an ideal situation for the Romans, where their formations and discipline could truly make a difference.
That's true. Because how disciplined and motivated are the Britons, the infantry, let's say? I mean, they could be motivated because it's their homeland, let's say. But are they as disciplined as the Romans? Even though the Romans just got attacked, at least 1 legion, right?
The Britons charged, but in these conditions, the Romans had a significant advantage. Whilst the chariots and cavalry had proved highly effective against small groups of Roman infantry, With the legions in a cohesive line, they now had little effect. The Britons quickly caught on to this fact and disengaged, their chariots and cavalry leaving the battlefield. The Roman infantry was now able to surge forward and catch a portion of the Briton infantry, routing it completely. The Britons
it looks like under pressure the Britons just pull back, which is smart of them. They're not just going full heavy just because they can. Obviously the infantry and some archers they lost, but you know. And again, under Romans or under Caesar, the Romans are still motivated and resilient, right? Under any other command, they probably would just mutiny and go home or something, right?
Were excellent at hit-and-run tactics and ambushes, but in set-piece battles, the Romans were far superior.
Okay.
Once again, the Britons sent a peace delegation, and Caesar, knowing that his options were limited, and that he did not have enough resources to carry out a full campaign, accepted, and then hastily withdrew from the island during the night.
Smart of Caesar. He's not falling into the trap of, I've done so much here, I can do even more. I put so much resources, I can't turn back. But he does that.
On his way back to Gaul, 2 ships were blown off course in a storm. 300 Romans were stranded and surrounded by a Belgae tribe, the Moruni, who Caesar had only recently subjugated and were keen for spoils and revenge. The Romans were assailed from all sides with missiles in hit-and-run attacks against their small group. Caesar caught
Here comes Caesar
and gathered as much cavalry as he could to personally lead them to the men's rescue.
I mean, look at that. Would any other leader of Rome at this time do that? Probably not. But Caesar is, like Napoleon, like Hannibal, like we saw, like Alexander Great, he's one of the men, right?
Managing to ride down the Gauls and save the Romans with only minimal casualties.
Wow.
Labienus would later be sent into the Belgae territory to winter there and reinforce Roman rule in the area.
Okay.
Neither the invasion of Britain nor this foray into Belgae territory were significant military achievements. However, they show why Caesar was so loved by his men.
Exactly.
He was brave, achieving things no Roman had ever done before. He was calm under pressure, and most importantly, he would lead from the front and showed that he cared for his soldiers and was prepared to risk his life to save them.
Exactly, like I said. But also, if Caesar gets something, prestige or whatever, his men also get that. Instead of, if Caesar gets something, it's only his. Right? That's pretty cool.
The Britain campaign had not achieved much for the Romans, but it did provide
intelligence
Caesar with crucial knowledge about the Britain's military, the climate, and the level of preparation that he would need to succeed. Lessons he would learn from for next year.
Okay.
Moreover, the Roman public and Senate were amazed by his feat of crossing the Channel into unknown territories, and a full 20 days of Thanksgiving were declared to recognize his achievement. After dealing with some administrative matters in 54 BC, Caesar began planning a second campaign in Britain. Almost 600 transports and 28 warships were built, implementing Veneti shipbuilding techniques better suited to the rough seas.
Makes
Caesar
sense.
called on his Gallic allies and vassals and amassed 4,000 cavalry, including tribal leaders. Once again,
tribal leaders, why? Because so they don't revolt when he's gone, right? Makes sense. Sort of hostages. But also, if they do great under Caesar here, they will also get prestige. So, you know, it's sort of threat, but also you can get prestige, right? And victories and respect, right? And you get more influence, whatnot, from the Romans. And also, Caesar didn't have cavalry, and now he has cavalry. He's learning, and better ships.
His army and minimizing the risk of revolts in Gaul.
Exactly.
He left half of his cavalry and 3 legions in Gaul, and crossed with 5 legions and 2,000 cavalry, more than double his previous numbers. This was going to be a full invasion. Caesar landed at the same place as before, but this time he was unopposed. He
Okay.
quickly established a camp in the area and sent out scouts, who promptly brought back some local prisoners. They informed Caesar that a large army had actually gathered to oppose the landing, but had retreated upon seeing the size of Caesar's force.
Okay.
Leaving a legion at the camp, he immediately set out in search of the Briton army. The Romans marched through the night and were able to catch up to the Britons in a hill fort on the other side of a river. Although the Romans were tired, Caesar was determined to confront the Britons and began crossing. The Britons' cavalry and chariots rushed down from the high ground to harass the Romans as they crossed. Caesar's allied Gallic cavalry were experienced in fighting in such scenarios and proved their value, chasing off the Britons, who quickly retreated to the woods surrounding the fort.
I mean, that's a classic great leader, right? It's not that Caesar does the same mistakes over and over. He does a mistake and learns. Very Roman as well, right? Okay.
As the legions began their advance up the hill, they were harassed from the woods by the Britons, preventing them from making significant progress until the 12th Legion formed a testudo and were able to make a rudimentary rampart in order to move over the walls.
Smart.
The Romans were now inside the fortifications, but the Britons were quick to escape the fort and retreated deeper into the woods.
They're smart.
Considering the men had carried out a night march and battle, and that he did not know the terrain and whether any more Britons would be waiting for him, Caesar made camp for the night. The next day, word reached him that a storm in the night had again damaged his ships. Without the ships, Caesar would be at the mercy of the Britons, so he decided to prioritize overseeing their repairs. He commanded his army to reassemble and march back to the beach. Upon arriving, he discovered that 40 ships were beyond repair, but the rest were salvageable. Caesar ordered that the ships be brought onto the beach, and a large wall was constructed encompassing the camp and the ships.
I mean, look at that engineering. Look at just building a wall to protect the ships and bringing the ships to land so they don't get damaged during other storms, right? And he's sending something probably to Labienus, right?
He also sent word to Labienus to build more ships in Gaul.
There you go. The engineer.
He then set off
look at
once
that.
again to find the Britons. They were in the same hill fort, but it was a larger force than before, under the command of Cassivellaunus, a tribal leader beyond the Thames, who was appointed the leader of a united coalition against the Romans.
I mean, look where they're fighting. Isn't that where London is? Right? That's the Thames River and London is there, no? That's pretty cool. Which makes sense because you live near a river, right?
Caesar had marched past this fort, possibly not wanting to attack such a large and fortified enemy, instead attacking exposed villages to try and draw Cassivellaunus out.
Right.
At the same time, his troops were constantly harassed by the Britons' cavalry and chariots, fighting skirmishes with the Roman cavalry on the flanks, luring them into the forests before turning back to inflict significant casualties.
Okay. Look at that.
The Britons seemingly allowed the Roman advanced party time to begin making a fort for the night. However, as construction began, the Britons attacked again. The Romans who were on guard were able to form a line to defend the site, but the fighting was brutal, with the Briton chariots darting in and out of the Roman formation. Caesar was forced to send a further 2 cohorts from the vanguard to quickly reinforce this line. The Romans were not used to the Briton style of fighting, particularly chariot hit-and-run tactics, drawing out the Roman infantry from formation who were too slow to catch them.
Exactly, and the Romans probably will learn from this how to easier defeat them, right? Maybe when the chariots are charging infantry, maybe the infantry moves out the way from the chariots, and then the chariots are encircled. Maybe.
At one point, the Britons were able to draw out a maniple far enough to create a gap, which they were able to exploit, punching through the Roman line and inflicting many casualties. It was not until the rest of the Roman army caught up that the Britons disengaged and retreated. Cassivellaunus was proving himself a cunning enemy.
Yep.
Caesar marched to the Thames towards Cassivellaunus' own territories in an attempt to draw them out.
Maybe that's
Though
where
he was
London
able
is.
to find a
Right.
position on the river where he could cross, the legions were once again harassed by Britons amassed on the other bank, who quickly retreated once the Romans were on dry land.
I mean, let's just think about this. How far is Caesar from his ships and the wall that he built? He is going further and further into territory. He can live off the land, but for how long? And he's getting weaker and weaker while it looks like the Britons are getting stronger and stronger. Uh-oh.
Cassivellaunus then made the decision to dismiss the vast majority of his army except for 4,000 chariots,
What?
likely realizing that fighting a pitched battle against the
Oh.
Roman heavy infantry would be futile.
Makes
A
sense.
smaller force would serve him much better in a guerrilla war. It would be easier
Wow.
to hide, faster to move, and need fewer supplies to maintain.
I mean, that's pretty smart. Although those who he kicked out might maybe be angry of him, right, to do that. But also it makes sense because he probably saw that the chariots and cavalry attacks that they did was effective against the Romans.
Given the fact that he knew the terrain and Caesar did not, this was a smart and calculated move.
Yep.
However, Cassivellaunus' previous wars with other Britons had made him many enemies, and
Uh-oh.
his new guerrilla tactics were not popular with the Trinobantes, whose leader Cassivellaunus had previously killed.
Uh-oh. Enemy of my enemy is my friend. And we saw this in the oversimplified Punic War, the Second Punic War Part 2, where one of the consuls who became dictator did a strategy that the Roman Senate and public didn't like because he didn't do anything in their eyes, right? So he got kicked out after he finished his dictator term, right?
They sent envoys to Caesar, surrendering and promising hostages. The Trinobantes
Wow.
were second in power only to Cassivellaunus himself, and
Uh-oh.
without their support, numerous tribes followed suit, surrendering to Caesar. They also provided critical intel to Caesar, including the location of Cassivellaunus' capital.
That's probably where the Romans will found London or Londinium, right? Near there.
Caesar marched there, another hill fort, burning all villages and fields on the way, and besieged it from both sides, once again hoping to draw the Briton leader into a direct confrontation. Cassivellaunus, however, did not take the bait.
Smart
Although
of him.
his guerrilla tactics were effective, they were taking a toll on the Britons, and the defenders within the capital quickly fled.
Same with during the Punic War, Second Punic War. You can do guerrilla warfare or not engaging the enemy directly on. But the only thing that will make you lose is that the public views that as cowardly or that you're letting the enemy attack the public or the normal citizen, right?
Cassivellaunus realized he needed to gain a victory. Not wanting to fight Caesar directly though, he instead sent envoys to 4 allied kings in Kent, who launched an attack on the Roman camp on the beach in order to try and draw Caesar away from Cassivellaunus' land. However, the Roman fortifications were strong, and the force Caesar had left on the beach was easily able to repel the attack.
Okay.
Cassivellaunus was forced to sue for peace. Caesar readily accepted in exchange for hostages and tribute. Winter was closing in, and he had no desire to spend it in unknown, hostile lands.
Makes sense.
The Romans returned to the beach and sailed back to Gaul.
I mean, they got victory for in the soldiers' eyes. They invaded twice and sort of got peace terms, sort of. First time maybe not, but it makes sense. And in their eyes, Caesar saves them from being starved out or something in the winter. Makes sense.
Overall, it is hard to see the invasion as an immense military victory.
Right.
Cassivellaunus had not been decisively defeated in battle nor captured, and the Romans maintained no presence in Britain. From the Briton standpoint, it was a strategic victory, having successfully pushed the Romans out of their lands.
True.
Still, his campaigns in Britain had taken 2 years, and without
Wow.
Caesar's presence, Gaul was beginning to stir.
Uh-oh.
In
Alright, so I think we're gonna end it here, right? Because that was the 2 invasions of Britain, and now I think we're going back to Gaul, so this will be the final part later on, right? Of the Gauls doing something here. I mean, that was pretty interesting. Obviously, it wasn't major victories for Caesar, but the first time he invaded, he got intelligence. The second time, he learned from his mistakes, and he also got some enemy of my enemies, my friend, allies there in Britain, so he knows he probably can get that later on if he goes again, or if Romans go there again, right? Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.